Welcome, everybody, to our LinkedIn Live event. Today, you're in for a treat. We have Matt Slotnick, who is the co founder and CEO of Poggio Labs. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, great to be here.
Well, I want to say up front, Poggio is a pioneer or the leader in account intelligence, helping revenue leaders and their teams build winning points of view to close bigger deals faster. So, explain to us, help us understand why point of view is important and crucial to generating revenues.
Yeah, it really, in our view and in the view of a lot of the customers we work with, it's how you differentiate. It's how you rise above the noise. And if you sort of think about selling into the enterprise, selling into these leaders who have a lot of priorities, there's a lot going on. There's usually a couple things on their list that they're going to focus on. Anything below that line is going to get delegated. It's going to get ignored. You're going to allow that to be on fire because it's just not something that's going to move the needle for you. And I think, unfortunately, we've seen just in the last 72 hours, some shifts in priorities for a lot of leaders. And so you start to think about what are the projects that are going to get funded? What are the things that are going to be back burner? That list for a lot of folks last week or the week before is very different than it looks today. And so when we talk about a point of view, it's how do you come to the table as a partner to a leader with a well thought out point of view for how you and your company and your offerings can solve these folks really, really big challenges and rise above that noise, rise above the line to really win a seat at that executive table rather than being the fifth, sixth, seventh priority to sell something that ultimately ends up looking fairly commoditized.
So what you're saying is that there are going to be fewer opportunities for salespeople to pursue. And what you're saying is that if you have that special lens, that point of view that allows salespeople to engage the customer in much deeper and much more productive conversations, their chances of closing the sale go way high.
Definitely. And even just getting that attention to begin with. I think if you look at a lot of the sales frameworks historically, they generally sort of prescribe the salesperson to show up and ask a bunch of questions and do your discovery and identify pain. And you just don't get the opportunity to play 20 questions anymore. These things have changed. And so a lot of vendors are selling things that on the surface look pretty similar. Every space becomes highly competitive very, very quickly. Gone are the days where you could have a 6, 9, 12-month lead selling a best of breed product and there's nobody else that can touch you. Now you've just got so many different vendors that are really fighting over the same couple slots at these companies. And I think that just gets worse as the economy gets let's say deteriorates. People are just going to be looking to the vendors they're already working with. Attention spans are lower. Again, if you're not above the fold, if you're not number 1 or 2 on the sort of problems to solve list, it's really unlikely that you're going to get anything done. And I think, if you don't come in and get that seat at the table, you're going to be left behind. And so for us, it's really how do you build that super detailed point of view that's backed by real-time information, that's up to date with the comings and goings in the world, and things move fast these days. And so if you don't really come prepared with that sort of deep POV, you just don't get that call back. You rarely get the meeting to begin with.
Matt, can you share a success story that illustrates all that you just said?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the actually, this is a recent case study we published with a company called Dialpad that I think folks are probably familiar with. Very fast growing company, just going from about 300 million in ARR to $1 billion is their target. And we've been working very deeply with their enterprise team, specifically for the last 6 or 9 months. And one of the things with them that they've seen with Poggio is that they were able to actually close 70% more revenue with 20% less pipeline. And when you sort of see that headline, sometimes you say, wait, less pipeline, not good. But if you actually think about it, this is really around qualification. It's around deciding where you're going to spend your time. It's about coming up with a really, really good point of view for how you, in this case, as Dialpad, can help a customer. And really just showing up for those situations where you actually can help. You've got a point of view. Hey, they should actually be working with us. This isn't spray and pray. And one of the things that's really interesting, and if you kind of look out, and I think this is going to be something that a lot of folks are gonna encounter lately, is if you're not aligned for success up front, somewhere along that sales cycle, you're going to get pushed below the line and your deal's not going to close. And the worst thing for a seller, for a team, for an organization is to have all your folks out there spending a lot of time on deals that are not going to close. But because it's in the enterprise, they're going to take 3, 6, 9 months. You're going to get to the finish line. And it's like, oh, that's going to get pushed. Or, oh, we thought that was a $300,000, $500,000 deal. Let's just get started with a $25K starter. And so the worst thing is really just spending your time on opportunities that you really shouldn't be spending your time on. And points of view are key to knowing that up front and not discovering that at the 11th hour as you're about to miss your number.
So tell us about your secret sauce. Obviously, it's AI, but give us a little bit of a flavor on how that works and why it is so revolutionary.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple pieces to this. So the platform that we built has a couple components that are most kind of pertinent to that question. So first is we do a bunch of research to understand who you are as a seller, what your company does, what your value props are. We can get some of this from the public internet, but we can also use your internal data, your battle cards, your talk tracks, your value frameworks, things like that, so that Poggio has a really, really deep understanding of who you are, what you do, and why a customer should care. What we can then do is process massive amounts of data. So, talk millions of different data points from thousands of different sources in real time. So you say, hey, I'm a seller at Salesforce. I'm going to go try to sell to Walmart. You think about the process of a seller trying to understand what's going on at Walmart. It's quite frankly impossible to get your head around all of that because it's going to come from sources all over the place. There's LinkedIn quotes from execs. There's Fortune magazines. There's kind of obscure logistics magazines that might have some really important information on their supply chain outsourcing, for example. And so if you're going to go build a point of view for how you can help that customer, it literally takes hours, days, weeks, could take a month. With Poggio, you get that in an instant and it's always up to date, so that anytime you go and talk to Walmart or Target or whoever it is, you've got this extremely up-to-date picture that's tailored specifically for the sorts of discussions that you need to be having to rise above the noise and bring that expert POV.
Well, that brings me sort of to an analogy, because what you're describing is a very tedious, minute process that has been stretched over a long time, and it's a grueling task. And the name Poggio comes from a famous race in Italy where there is a very long hill that goes on and on and on that tests all those drivers. So tell us why you use that metaphor.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I'm a big cyclist and love pro bike racing. And I think endurance sports and cycling in particular are really good metaphors for competition and strategic thinking. And so the thing that's interesting about the Poggio is it's a hill that comes at the very end of a very, very long race. And the race is ultimately decided on the Poggio. But before you get to the Poggio at sort of the 11th and a half hour, it's actually the last couple of kilometers of a 300-kilometer bike race, is 6.5 to 7 hours of teamwork and tactics and intelligent sort of positioning that to a kind of layperson that's not deep into bike racing looks very, very boring. It's sort of like, hey, they're just riding their bike for 7 hours. But if you kind of know what you're looking for, there's a lot of things that happen along the course of 7 hours to position yourself in the right place at the Poggio. And so I think it's actually quite a bit like sales. And when we start to think about what's your POV for a race, what are you going to do to put yourself in that winning position? Because if you don't get it right in the first hour, you're not going to be in the right place in the 7th hour, and you're ultimately not going to win the race. And so we like to kind of, as a company, think about, one of our values is actually control the race. And it's about sort of showing up prepared with a strategy and being decisive when you have to, and sort of being intelligent in all moments.
What are the limits of AI? Or better, maybe what are the misconceptions where people don't really understand on how to use it to their strategic advantage?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic because I think, I have an answer for sales. There's different answers for different parts of sales. There's different answers for all these different types of products. And I think the thing that people often get wrong is they want it to be a bit of an all or nothing, right? It's going to solve all my problems or it's useless. And I think when you start to look at these very, very complicated domains like enterprise sales, and you think about all of the things that go into a sale process, if you're going to go sign a 7-figure deal, if you just think about how many things happen from how many different people, how many different interrelated workflows are going to go on over the course of this sort of opportunity, and then post-close, there's a bunch of things that happen that are actually kind of dependent on what happens earlier in the sales cycle. And people want this really clean answer of, hey, we've got enterprise sales and AI is going to help us, and we're going to create this box around enterprise sales and use AI, and it's just going to solve this problem. And I think the reality is these things are so much more fine-grained, and it's not always even clear which parts of those process are better done by a person or better done by a machine. And that's actually one of the things that we think a lot about at Poggio, which is when you take this really complicated process, where are the leverage points that you can inject to help people be a lot better? And ultimately, AI is about leverage. And there are some tools where you can get a little bit of leverage a lot of times. I actually think about maybe call recording software as a really interesting thing here. Recording your calls, transcribing them is not going to change the course of a deal necessarily, but it's a lot of little leverage points that add up to something big. And that is really valuable. On the other hand, you have some people who want to, or some companies that are looking to, I think a very kind of common one is automating the BDR or the SDR, right? And you say, hey, we've got this really complicated problem. Let's go put it in a box and essentially sell that box. And I think people have this desire to automate 100% of something where maybe you could actually get a lot of leverage with 80% or 90% and allow that person to be the final 10%. And I think one of the misconceptions is really just sort of understanding the best way to apply this leverage into a complicated process. And there's an interesting anecdote that I think about quite a bit. And if you sort of rewind the clock back to the invention of electricity and how that impacted factories, you look at the initial couple years or I think decades, actually, very little changed, right? You had this massive invention of electricity, literally, and it really just didn't change that much in the factory. And it sort of took a generation of factory owners and designers to step back and say, hey, we've got this new technology, electricity. How should we redesign these factories to make use of this? And in that case, they went from sort of a monolithic steam power to localized electricity, stations. And so you sort of think about what's the version of that for whether it's enterprise sales or whatever domain you're in. I think that's going to take a while to play out, and it's going to take some trial and error. And it's not this kind of big bang of, oh, we've got AI now and sales it's just overnight a completely different ballgame.
So help me understand the language that salespeople are going to use when they have that point of view in front of them. And how do you help them translate that into the different realities of the stakeholders? Let's say the CFO wants more financial data, the IT person wants more process information, the CEO wants more bottom line information. So how do you customize that when you do a presentation and have meetings?
Yeah, so really, really interesting question, because the answer is actually a piece of why you need to use something like Poggio, preferably use Poggio, is the language you should use is actually the customer's language, but it's a really hard thing to figure out. So if you go into that organization, and this is a great example, I think data platforms are something that there's sort of this conversation is happening probably everywhere at this point, right? Because we've got all this data, we need a data platform, we need to automate the top line or the bottom line or the supply chain or whatever it is. And so if you start to think about the different ways that you could sell sort of data or automation into a company, there's a million entry points. You can go to the finance people and say, hey, we need our revenue data so we can close faster. You can go to the revenue leaders and say, hey, we've got this better understanding of our customers' buying patterns based on this data. Or you can go to the logistics people and say, hey, we've got a supply chain issue and we don't know how to trace the different parts. And you go to those different folks and you could probably create an opportunity for any one of those three. The trick is figuring out which of those three or which of those 5 or 10 or however many are the things that when you get into that room with the C-suite and one of those gets funded, that you're attached to the thing that gets funded. And the only way to do that is to really understand what's driving these organizations. What is the way that they describe the problem? What is the internal language they use? And then find a way to sort of inject yourself into that conversation as a partner. And that's exactly the sort of thing that's really, really, really hard to do, even for one opportunity. It's essentially impossible to do at scale, but exactly the sort of thing that folks that do this job best, and a lot of Poggio customers are doing very scalably and very intelligently.
How do you balance those two components, the technology component and the need to humanize that interaction?
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons that just as a founder, I actually love the enterprise sales domain is because, and you may talk to people that have a different point of view here, but there's always going to be a person in that relationship. Ultimately, you can give that person a lot of leverage or give that team a lot of leverage, but ultimately you have a group of people at a company that are helping the buyers at another company be successful. And so our job is really looking for those leverage points to make that person really, really effective, to give them the tools to show up and win trust and solve these problems. But at the end of the day, that person is always there, especially when you get into these larger sort of opportunities. And this is something that, for us, we work with these companies that sell complicated products where every sale is a multi-legged stool with a lot of different buyers and sellers involved. It's not, hey, it's a 5K ASP product and you've got the exact same pitch and you want to go blast it out to 100,000 people. There's plenty of tools that do a really good job at that. That's not us, because ultimately we look to give leverage to these companies selling complicated solutions that are solving big customer problems, and that's where you can never remove the person from that equation.
So you are obviously very excited about the current state of your company and how you're growing and create more customers. What are you excited about with the future developments of AI that are just around the corner?
Yeah, I think the really interesting thing about AI is that every company is going to have to reinvent itself many, many, many times over the next 5 or 10 years based on the capabilities of these products. And so we really think about what is the best way to give leverage to our customers. And the way that you give leverage is going to change. And that's scary, but it's also exciting. But it really, I think it sort of changes the nature of how you build companies, or how you should expect to build companies, which is in the past, kind of first generation or second generation of SaaS, you could kind of get to this certain point and you could keep growing. You're solving a problem. There's enough there. I think with AI, even the kind of initial launch of LLMs, there was a lot of people who were on really good growth trajectories who all of a sudden are completely disintermediated and had to reinvent themselves from zero. And I think whether you're a laggard or a winner, the winners are going to have to reinvent themselves, arguably even more, because the technology is going to change. And it's really about how do you take the capabilities of all of these new state-of-the-art models and new workflows that you can start to automate or provide leverage for, and wrap those into a product that your customer can ultimately consume, hopefully quite easily. And if you're going to kind of track that state of the art as everything changes, you're going to have to rethink the way that your product works. It's probably going to look different. You're probably going to have to talk about it differently. And if you don't, somebody else is going to come up and do it for you. And so I think one of the most exciting things is just the rate of change, that you really have to stay on your toes and be open to a lot of things changing, a lot more things than you might have been in the past.
It reminds me of what Mark Benioff says about the beginner's mind. We live in an age where, as you said earlier, the company that you're running right now will be totally different 18 months from now, because you need to reinvent yourself constantly. And if you have an expert's mindset, then you're locked into that. Whereas when you have the beginner's mindset, you're always open to new opportunities and iterations.
Right. And nothing's sacred. And I think it's a hard muscle to develop. And the thing that was your advantage in the previous generation of products or technology could be your disadvantage in the future. And I think, Benioff is a really good example of this around even just pricing models, right?
Yeah.
Salesforce was the seat-based pricing model. You look now and that's all changing, right? And you can sort of sit there and be beholden to seat-based pricing, or you can change to something that's more aligned with the value that you deliver. And I think you're going to see this across the board, and the fact that you're already seeing it from folks like Salesforce, and I think ServiceNow is kind of starting to follow, and a lot of these large vendors. If they're going to do it at that scale, I think everybody's got to be thinking like that.
So the reason we are having this conversation is because you are going to teach a masterclass, 80 minutes, and we're going to publish a link below so you can sign up. Tell us what you'll be teaching in the masterclass.
Yeah, so it's maybe no surprise, all about POVs. It's how you can build points of view and how you can do that with Poggio, but sort of just philosophically, why does it matter? How do you get your reps to follow these? What are best practices in sort of putting them to work? And ultimately, again, this is about rising above the noise. And this is something that unfortunately is even more topical today than it was when we scheduled this initially. But I think it's the new normal, and folks are either going to adapt to it or not. And for us, it's really, how do you become a partner to your customers in these, or your prospects and customers in these times of change? Or how do you kind of stay outside the house looking in and hope to get a meeting to solve their seventh or eighth most important problem when they get around to it? Nobody wants to be in that position. Everybody wants to be in that driver's seat and really come and show up as a trusted partner to help folks untangle the mess of the world that we live in, rather than just sort of watch folks flounder.
Yeah, you can either focus on the noise on the sidelines or improve your game, which means in this case that you're going to have a thinner pipeline, but you're going to have better conversations with fewer customers and make more sales. What's not to like?
Exactly.
Well, click on the link below and sign up. I'm very excited, Matt, that you're doing this masterclass. I can't wait to see the impact that you are having on the world of sales. Thank you.
Thanks, Garrett.